Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting in the Finance Committee to order, please. And the first order of business, since there are no public speakers this morning, is the approval of the minutes of the July 27th meeting. And may I please have a motion?
Motion made.
Mr. Sador, second, please, and a vote, please. Minutes are approved. Gary, could you take us through the work plan?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's one change to your work plan. The resolution to authorize the execution for filing and acceptance of government funds has been moved from this month to next month. The next item will be Budget Watch.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about August flash results versus the new mid-year forecasts. Combined passenger revenues in August were on target. Slightly higher revenues at New York City Transit were offset by lower commuter rail revenue. Similar results were experienced in June and July. So we're pretty much on target with the passenger revenue. Total revenue was $2.5 million, or 2% favorable for the month. Year-to-date, it's $8 million, or 1% favorable. We think some very favorable weather in July and August in particular benefited the results. Operating expenses were favorable at all agencies. Combined, they are $84 million, or 1.5% favorable. Transit was $42 million, or 1% favorable. Long Island Railroad was $25 million, or 3% favorable. Metro-North was $16 million, or 3% favorable. There do appear to be some real savings from vacancies, energy, and materials, but a lot of those variances are timing related, and they'll smooth out as we get towards the end of the year. Debt service costs were favorable for the month, and most of that was timing and a slight reduction in some variable rate interest. Moving to subsidies, September year-to-date PBT taxes were virtually on target. They were 1% under budget, under forecast, I should say. Year-to-date real estate taxes, which we've been watching very close, were close to the forecast, but they've moved around a little bit from month to month. Through September, we have total real estate receipts of $294 million, which were $2.5 million, or less than 1% below forecast. MRT receipts have actually been somewhat favorable. They've been showing a slight month-to-month increase starting in July, which is good. This is what we had. This is the way we forecasted out the mid-year forecast. We were hoping for a month-to-month improvement, although modest. Urban taxes have jumped around a little bit. They were actually pretty favorable in August, but unfavorable in September. So overall, they're a little bit unfavorable year-to-date. Balanced with the MRT, we're pretty much on target, just slightly unfavorable.
Douglas, just one thing. I think this is the first time looking at the numbers. I reviewed them with Gary this morning. As you said, for the summer, for the last 2 months, there's been a 20% increase in run rate on the MRT,
yes,
which the mortgage recording tax, and I think that could have some favorable implications for us going forward. It's the first time that you've started to see an uptick. Why it's been only 2 months, it has been an uptick. Now, the urban tax hasn't changed, the big transaction tax hasn't changed, but the mortgage recording tax has changed, and I think that may be the beginning of something we need to watch very closely.
Yeah, we are. We're seeing that. It is a modest uptick, but at least it is an uptick. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. Yeah. Urban was, we got $18 million in August, but only $12 million in September. Just to sort of put that in perspective, last year in August we had $62 million in urban tax collections and $48 in September. So while they're a little bit better than we had been doing earlier in the summer, they're well below last year's, but this is the way we had forecast anyway. We're looking at all these numbers right now, subsidies, expenses, revenues. We're talking to the agencies, and we'll get back to you in November with a revised forecast. That's all I have.
Our next item is the Finance Watch.
Thank you. Okay. Finance Watch begins on page 11 of your committee book. We have a few things to update the committee on this morning. The first is that on August 4th, we terminated 2 of our swaps with Lehman Brothers Special Financing, Inc., that had a guarantee from the parent. We had been negotiating for several months, to unwind these transactions. In addition to those transactions, we terminated an investment agreement also with LBSFI, or Lehman Brothers Special Financing, Inc., and that was related to a reserve fund for 2 Broadway COPs, or certificates of participation. In total, the termination resulted in a payment from MTA to Lehman Brothers of $9.589 million. This reflects all 3 transactions and amounts accrued under the swaps since the beginning of the bankruptcy, when we ceased making payments. The key thing here is that the termination was approved by the Lehman Brothers Creditors Committee, and it was achieved at a significant discount from where the actual mark-to-market values were on all 3 transactions, approximately 53% of the total value at the time of the unwind. Approximately $10 million. Are there any questions about this?
Pat, could you, there were 2 swaps and then one, I guess, and one GIC.
An investment agreement,
What
right.
was the value of the GIC? I imagine it was positive territory.
The value of the GIC was in positive territory, and it served to offset the negative value of the 2 swaps, both of which were negative.
Was that part of the 53% savings you just alluded to?
Yes, it was. The value that we got out of the GIC was about 75% of the actual value, so we achieved a significantly greater value than we had expected. We were expecting to receive a lower, but because, again, we had all 3 transactions to work with, and we negotiated pretty aggressively with the creditors committee representatives still at Lehman Brothers. We were able to get the value we thought was appropriate for the transactions.
Still in all, the sad fact of the matter is that we paid $9.6 million to a defunct investment bank. That is money that we could ill afford to be paying out. And I realize that swaps over time may be positive or negative, and it just depends on when the music stops. I look at the list of our counterparties, and I'm extremely concerned about AMBAC. I'm extremely concerned about AIG Financial Products. I don't think anyone thinks Citibank is necessarily out of the woods. We have continuing exposure on these swaps. Under your leadership, Chairman Saul, we were able to put in a policy that said any new swaps come to this committee for approval. I would like to expand that policy to say that any changes to existing swaps, any modifications, any extensions in those swaps also need to be brought to this committee. We're responsible. I mean, I can't point to either of you two and chide you for this, because I don't think these contracts were made on your watch.
But it doesn't matter. You know why, Doreen? Because, quite frankly, I don't know, when were these, like AI, you'd mentioned it, I'm not familiar completely with all this stuff, but when you look at AIG, when were those swaps put on, Patrick? How long ago?
I believe the AIG swaps were done in 2005.
Okay. If you went back to 2005, being honest about it, nobody here in this room would have thought AIG was going to wind up with $180 billion of financing from the government. I mean, it wasn't even plausible. It was a AAA character. It was a Dow stock. It was a AAA insurance company. I don't think in realistic that the AIG could have, we would have assumed would have wound up where it was. And I don't think we would have assumed Lehman Brothers wound up. I mean, we went through a cataclysmic period here. Who else was it, Doreen? It was AIG.
UBS, Citigroup, AMBAC, a whole long list of people.
You're talking about, even AMBAC, I mean, you're talking about some of the premier blue chip insurance carriers and banks and financial companies here in New York. And I think that, in fairness, this was such a unbelievable holocaust. We wouldn't have questioned these swaps. I remember I was sitting here, all of us were sitting here 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Nobody would have ever, questioned the credibility of these swaps. Now, I assume going forward we're still using swaps, right, Patrick, on some of these variable rate things that we're doing, right?
We still have an active portfolio of swaps.
Are you putting new ones on?
No, we're not. We do not have authorization from the board to do new swaps. We would have to come back to the committee and to the board for approval to do any new swaps at this point.
Is this something we should be doing?
You know, we are, from time to time, we do receive swap ideas from our syndicate managers, and, you know, we're looking at them, but there's nothing at this point that we would want to bring to the board for approval at this point.
But if they find, in fact, that there are things that are recommended, should we be looking at them? I mean, you're much more familiar with this than
I think
am.
it's fine to look at them, but I will never recommend that this agency do another swap again. I mean, there are a whole long list of risks associated with these swaps that I believe that the public sector is less in a position to expose itself to these sorts of risks than corporations who are heavy users of this type of product. I would say we have to proceed with the utmost of caution. If you look at the termination values on all the swaps we have outstanding, if anything, God forbid, happened to UBS and we had to make a termination payment, it would be massive. And the value and the benefit we're getting for these swaps, in my judgment, is simply not worth the risks that are associated with them. On this swap alone, because of this termination payment, by my calculations, we're behind about $3 to $4 million in how this swap has actually worked versus the way we had hoped it would work, largely because of this termination payment. I think we have to proceed with utmost caution, and as I said, I encourage staff. I don't know whether I need to make a motion to require that we do this. If we're going to restructure any of these swaps, extend their life, change their features or qualities, that should be discussed with this board before it's done.
Has the advisors, Goldman Sachs and people like that, Patrick, have they, in your discussions with them, do they feel that these are things we should be doing, and does it warrant bringing that to this committee, as Noreen suggested?
Well, I guess a couple things. One is that when we sought committee and board approval for our bond financing program for 2009, in January of 2009, we discussed at that point removing swap authority from the authorization, which we did. We did leave in language to the effect that allowed staff to, and here we were thinking specifically of the Lehman Brothers transactions. We gave ourselves the authority, we sought board authority for us to unwind these transactions, whether it be through a market quotation process, which we worked very hard on for a number of months with Goldman and Nixon Peabody, our bond counsel. So that authority with respect to these transactions was granted because we knew it was imminent. We knew that the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy filing had occurred, and we had to find a way out of this. It took us a number of months, obviously. We were very pleased with the outcome. I think the anecdotal evidence we're getting is that other transactions by public entities are being terminated at not as attractive values as we got here. And so what we're reporting is we paid about 53 cents on the dollar, roughly. Other entities are paying 60 and 70 and 80 cents, higher levels than what we paid here. At this point, there are the only other transactions that we're concerned about, as you pointed out, is AMBAC. We do have transactions with AMBAC because of their downgrade. We're very concerned about them, and we're working with our financial advisor on dealing with potential terminations of those, keeping in mind that we are not the terminating entity. In this case, Lehman Brothers, and also in the case of AMBAC, they would be the terminating entity. We feel that the documents that we've negotiated at the time of these swaps give us adequate protection for an unwind that puts us in a better negotiating position than the counterparty.
Has AMBAC posted collateral because of the ratings decline?
They have not, because the swap is negative mark-to-market to us. If that were reversed, then they certainly would have to post collateral. At this point, there's no collateral posting.
If our ratings decline, though, we would have to post collateral the way this works.
If our ratings decline to the double B level, that's correct, we would have to post collateral. But our ratings are not in jeopardy at this moment.
We would have to post collateral
if the mark-to-market were of a greater than...
If the unwind was going to cost us money, we would have to post collateral.
Right.
So it's the reciprocal of where
That's
they
right.
are. Yeah.
What is the potential, as of today, The one that obviously is the most concerned would be AMBAC, correct, Ori? Citibank and AIG, I mean, it is what it is, but AMBAC, what do you feel that the potential liability there is as of today if the swap had to be unwound, Patrick?
I couldn't give you an estimate right now. It's something we're looking at. The mark to market is not what we would obviously be on the hook for, the full value. If we chose to terminate that, again, these documents allow us to go through what's called a market quotation process to effectively replace the sick counterparty, if you will, and that process can take weeks or months, and we would first begin that process by looking at the market quotation. The difficulty that we had with Lehman is finding, at least 3 counterparties that are willing to come to the table, agreeing to the same terms and conditions to get a successful market quotation achieved. One of the things that we're hearing out of the Lehman Brothers Creditors Committee is that a number of these transactions that entities negotiated replaced Lehman with a new counterparty, and now the Creditors Committee is looking at those transactions, auditing them, suggesting that maybe the value wasn't the right value, and so forth. What we achieved was very different with Lehman. We actually had approval from the Creditors Committee on the value. In effect, there's no clawback that the Creditors Committee can come back and say, we don't like that value. They approved the value, so we're done. So when you think about AMBAC, we're in the early stages of looking at solutions on how to deal with that. AMBAC is still a viable entity at this point, although their ratings have triggered this event in the documents that allow us to now determine what we want to do. They're BB at the moment. Yeah.
If you look at the quarterlies, just to get a ballpark, the fair market value of the MBAC swap right now is minus 8.39. That's as of June 30, and as you mentioned, that's not necessarily the value we pay to terminate, but 8.3 million.
So that gives you some.
Right.
Gary, do you want to address this at all?
I mean, I think we've articulated the issues. Commissioner Frasca is basically raising the point that I think everybody in the committee is well aware of, that we have substantial counterparty exposure, and as the financial sector has gone through a lot of turmoil, as we've seen over the last 24 months, that can affect us, fairly dramatically. I think that there's 2 aspects to it, though. One is the proactive way, the way that we comport ourselves in the marketplace going forward. And obviously, we've substantially become more cautious in our issuances over the last year and a half. And the other is with respect to the scope of our borrowing. The scope of our borrowing, I don't want to sound like a victim, but the scope of our borrowing is somewhat out of our control because we borrow what's necessary in order to continue to finance the approved capital plan. And as we all know, that requires a very substantial amount of borrowing in order to maintain the tempo. So we are somewhat out of control on the one side, which is how much it is that we have to raise in the capital markets. We are in control of the other, which is how it is that we raise that money in the capital markets. One of the things that we're going to talk about in a second, has to do with utilizing a federal line of credit for a particular project. And I think we have to continue to look throughout of various ways to continue to manage our exposure. But with respect to derivatives and counterparty exposure, I think everybody's seeing we've substantially reduced our exposure, and I can't imagine us moving in the other direction in this market.
Could I just ask that if any of our existing swaps are restructured or extended in any fashion, that be brought to this committee for approval before that's done?
The only thing that I'm a little resistant to brought to the committee has to do with the timing of the fact that obviously we meet on a monthly basis. And so, for example, the Lehman unwind sort of happened over a substantial time period, but then when it was time to act, it was an issue of a couple of days that we had to get the agreed upon number. We did have a counterparty negotiation that we didn't advance, and then back to the creditors committee. And I would be reluctant to say that I can be sure that either I or my successor is going to be comfortable with always having a 30-day or longer clock on that. So I would ask that you, that in terms of briefing or as we have, where we've acted in the past, we've identified and sent out to the board members information that was relevant to discussion irrespective of a committee meeting. And there I'm 100% comfortable with what it is that you're asking. With respect to actually bringing to a committee, and there's nothing that's in process right now, so it's not that. But I'm a little reluctant to say that it would necessarily come back to the committee in this because of timing issues.
I think those can be overcome and solved, and I'm reluctant to absolve myself of my fiduciary responsibilities in this matter, Gary.
I actually feel that as another member of this board with some knowledge of this subject that I am sensitive to the questions of timing here. And I think that to put in a potential month's delay as a practical matter in terms of being able to act is, I mean, I can well imagine circumstances where that would not be in our interest as a practical matter. So right. That I don't believe that a concrete requirement that any change in our swap situation has to be approved by this board before we go forward on it is something that actually makes sense in terms of how we do business.
Can I offer something perhaps that to advance the conversation? There are times when a briefing and discussion doesn't cause delay, obviously, and there are other times when it might. And if Commissioner Frasca's point is, with respect to those where it's reasonable to think that we don't anticipate there being an impact, a negative financial impact on the MTA by virtue of a briefing or board discussion in advance, then that I would, of course, concur in. On the other hand, I would like to leave flexibility that in the event that it would have a negative financial impact, or we believe that it would have a negative financial impact on our negotiations, that we not encounter the delay.
In talking about a swap extension, for example, it's not typically if you don't do it today, the opportunity passes you by. And it's really with the extension of existing swaps that I have the greatest concern, where you could get a better rate if you extend out another 10 years on a product that perhaps you should. So that's the area where I have the greatest concern. And if there's some way to meet my concerns, I'd be very, very appreciative.
But I think, Gary, what Gary's saying is reasonable. You don't, from my standpoint, I'm speaking for myself now personally, I think you have to have enough confidence in the key people here in the finance area to be able to satisfactorily resolve these things. And I think Gary's suggestion's right. I think we have to leave it up to the people. If it's something that has to be acted upon, I do think they have to do it, and I agree with Mark. If it's something that can be weighed or general policy thing or review, I think it should be brought to the committee. And that's, for me, the way I would like to see it left, unless, I mean, if you want to bring a vote or something like that, I assume a motion, we can do it, but I prefer not to do that right now.
I'd like to work on some language that perhaps we could bring to a vote next month.
Okay.
That's fine. Another thing that I could suggest, Commissioner, is that as you know, we're going to be sort of, as we get closer to the end of the year, talking about what the resolution for next year is going to look like. And we've had on and off again conversations about that, and that could also be an appropriate place for those discussions.
Yes, I'd like to accelerate that discussion as well.
And I think the most important thing here, and I think that's definitely a sense of this committee, is that, and I think Patrick's aware of this, and certainly Gary is, that we are taking a much more active role in managing the process and overseeing, not managing, but overseeing the process from a fiduciary standpoint because of what's happened here and what's happened to us and what's happened to the market. And I think it's important that the sense of the committee, Patrick, and you understand the sense of the committee, as Commissioner Frasca said, that's what's key here. And I think I personally, as chairman, leaving up to you, as I have respect for you, to come back to us if you feel that there's something this committee should know, and we can all be gotten a hold of at any time, and you're aware of what the feeling is here. I think that's what's important. Certainly.
Excuse me, Andrew. Are these swaps a necessary tool in the function of our financial transactions, or is this something that we're trying to get out of and not do in the future anymore?
what would the way?
Or is it a
Why don't you
necessity?
explain it? I don't think it is as much a necessity as it isn't a necessity any longer. It was the way we were operating before. But Patrick, why don't you?
Well, like what Doreen's trying to do from this day forward, should we be, excuse me, focusing on getting rid of the existing swaps that we have?
No.
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 Okay.
It's only if they
I'm not
become,
too- I
the
just-
problem
it was a
happens,
layman's
Carl,
question.
if the participant on the other side becomes distressed. And the reason they mentioned AMBAC is because their credit rating is coming down to a point where it's no longer investment grade credit rating. One more drop, I guess, right, Doreen? It's off? It's off now. Okay, so they're a very distressed creditor. Where when you mention Citicorp and you mention AIG, look, we all know what's going on there. I think that's a different situation than you have with AMBAC. AMBAC to me would be the one. Is that right, Patrick? That they're most concerned with.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think Patrick understands and Gary understands what we want. I really do.
Right, and I think I would just say with respect to that, it's over a year ago that Lehman Brothers bankruptcy occurred, and we're talking about a termination that occurred over a period of 10 months of negotiations and on and off discussions, quite heavily over the past 5 months leading up to the August 4th action. So it's important that the members understand that this isn't something that's going to just drop on our head overnight and we have to act and write a check. That we do have time. The documents provide us with ample protections to resolve the situation, either by bringing in another party to stand in their shoes, or like we did with Lehman, to actually negotiate what we think is the best value we can get out of these transactions and actually write a check. So I think there are options that are available to us. As I said earlier, there are no swaps on my desk that I am eager to bring to the board for approval. So we're not talking about new transactions. So I've just.
I think we should move on now because we've got a lot to do. Doreen, if you feel this is something you want to pursue, obviously, we will look at it.
Absolutely. It just breaks my heart that we had to throw $9.5 million down another Wall Street rat hole. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, just one request. I think we're all. What I'd like to see is, could we see a chart of the risk, just like the Lehman was at risk, a chart that says what UBS and Citibank and AIG of that potential risk?
Sure. It is in the quarterly financial statements. Every quarter.
One we just got today?
That's right. There's a table in the back that presents the prevailing ratings of each counterparty, and then as well as trigger events that would cause potential terminations. Those are all discussed in the financial statements, and of course we keep those current.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's worth noting that these reflect market circumstances, and in the event of termination, you might find that you are owed money or that you owed money. So they go both ways, and certainly in light of recent events, it's become a much more problematic piece of financing structuring, which until recent events was actually a very sort of accepted and conventional part of attempting to structure the most cost-effective debt that was available in a given market. Circumstances change. Maybe they'll turn back. Maybe they'll change back at some point. I mean, it's not great at the moment.
Okay, let's move on. Patrick, is there any more in the finance report?
There are a couple of things. I wanted to update the committee on a transaction to provide MTA Bridges and Tunnels with new capital money for its existing approved capital program. On September 10th, we issued $200 million of TBTA general resolution bonds. We did this through a competitive bid. That's notable that we haven't done that in a number of years. The bonds were issued as what we call Build America bonds, or BABs. This is where the bonds are issued as a taxable bond, and the TBTA receives a 35% federal subsidy. It occurs with each interest payment date on the bonds through their life. We did confirm our ratings of AA2, AA- and AA from Moody's. I think we note here that the outlooks from both Moody's and Fitch changed from stable to negative, and I think in both cases they were concerned about coverage. I would say that we're on a coverage basis, we're well over 2 times coverage. So we're working with the rating agencies to, again, get comfortable on their outlook. The transaction went very well. We initially had printed an estimate of $158 million. We increased the size to $200 million on what we felt were very favorable market dynamics. And we achieved an all-in interest cost of 3.56% on the bonds, and these are again 30-year bonds, and that's after subsidy, which we think is a pretty good cost of funds for TBTA capital programs.
What was that spread to Treasuries, Pat?
Approximately 125 basis points.
Versus the 350 basis points on the prior deal, which admittedly was a lower credit, but I think it's showing that this market is maturing and people are accepting municipal credits to a better degree so that those spreads are tightening, which is what we'd hoped would happen.
The winning bid was provided by Merrill Lynch Bank of America that bid jointly with Ramirez and Company, and the cover bid was J.P. Morgan. There were a number of other bids, and we're appreciative of those firms that participated in the transaction.
Pat,
yes.
My recollection is that we had the negative rating removed, the negative outlook removed, rather, from, I think it may have been
that was Standard & Poor's
MTA
on the transportation revenue credit,
which is the parent.
I'm sorry, that was right, Moody's. I apologize. That was Moody's on transportation revenue. Had us on negative outlook, and they've since removed that.
I'm just interested in why they would have chosen to then put the revenue generating sub on negative outlook, where they had reversed that position on the something farther up the chain.
Okay, yeah, Gary wanted to respond to this.
You know, we have extensive conversations with the agencies on a routine basis, and in this particular case, with respect to the Triborough credit, this is really as you can see from the pricing, it actually, we didn't believe it was going to affect pricing, and it actually didn't. At least I don't believe it affected pricing. It had to do with the technical issue of, as you look at our financial plan and the capital plan, we have a very, very extensive portfolio of projects at Triborough that need to be performed. That's going to require a lot of debt issuance because Triborough finances its own projects. The impact of that over time, of course, is to reduce the coverage because you're increasing the amount of debt. Meanwhile, you have relatively modest increases in tolls that are projected. At the end of the day, it's up to the board to decide what the toll levels are. But before I would overanalyze the Triborough ratings outlook by Fitch and S&P, I don't think I would look at it. The issue with respect to the trans-rev credit that you mentioned first, where we had the negative watch by Moody's, was really much more about the perceived health of the organization. It was very important to us. It's very important to us to spend a lot of time with them so that they could come to understand why we thought that our health was better than they had perceived. Here, I think it's a specific technical issue having to do with a long-term look at debt issuances at Triborough, not about whether or not the Triborough is going to be able to make its payments. Again, that's why I think you saw that it performed so well in the marketplace.
And we're continuing to work with them to try and get that eradicated.
Yeah.
Because it's a little discouraging. It's saying something about the way they are analyzing the situation.
Right. Again, I would just place it in the context of what they're actually saying, which is a little different than what they were saying on the trans-rev credit. Okay.
Patrick, any more?
Okay. Lastly, we just want to update the committee on upcoming financings. We do need to come to market with transportation revenue bonds in the coming weeks. Here in the book, we talk about $475 million. We're actually reassessing the capital needs at this time and the cash flow needs, and we think this issue is going to be closer to a $600 million issue. We don't have a structure or method of sale or any other particulars of the transaction laid out yet, and we'll come back to the committee next month with those details. Lastly, we do have a $150 million bond at TBTA that is due on January 10th, and that's our mandatory tender bond that we issued earlier in the year, and we're preparing a transaction that will pay that off on a current basis, and so that'll come right on the heels of the transportation revenue issuance. So we have two deals to come to market here in the next approximately 6 weeks.
Okay, let's move on because we have the capital plan.
Just one quick question. When we did the BABS deal in April for the transportation revenue credit, we upsized it. And I thought we were hoping that that meant we would not necessarily have to come back to market in great size.
No, we thought that it would get us until the mid-fall, actually, right about where we expect. To the extent that we'll have a more full discussion about this next month, and there are some spending issues, but it's really more. There are some cash issues that are taking place inside the capital plan, and some of that has to do with Fed funds reimbursement, which again I think we'll talk about in more detail next month. This is less about the aggregate amount of money that's going out the door, more it's about the sourcing of the money that goes out the door. So it's a longer conversation, probably not quite ripe yet.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
Finish back?
Yes, thank you.
We have to go. Okay. Gary, go ahead.
Next, we have CFO remarks.
You know, we're running pretty far.
Capital.
Yeah, we're running pretty far behind. So let me just say that we should move right into the agenda. Basically, the quick takeaway from this month is that we are tracking extremely tight to the budget, and so that's a positive since we've gone months and months and months of being pretty wide to the budget. So I think the fact that we're in September's finance and tracking close to the budget is a positive thing.
With that said, then the next item would be our first action item on page 21 of your books, and that is a loan from the Federal Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Program.
This is not the actual loan so much as it is the authority to enter into an application to file the loan applications. This is briefly, and this has been discussed in the railroad committees and also in the capital plan context. This is our obligation under the change in federal law to go to positive train control on the railroads. This allows MTA as a financing vehicle to go to the feds to access a particular line of credit that's available for this purpose. Cost of funds presumably will be less than our other cost of funds. This is not about whether or not we should have positive train control. The federal government's already decided we should have positive train control. It's not about whether or not we should spend $600 or $700 or $800 million on a project like this. That's what this costs. And the actual.
By the way, it comes out of the capital plan too.
Well, it's part of the capital plan that you have in front of you, and it'll be part of the discussions between us and Albany and our other partners over the next few months. This is the mechanical aspect of advancing the loan process with the feds. But it does require an action.
And the second, please. And a vote, please. Call them up. Okay.
And the second action concerns the 2010 to 14 capital program. Linda Kleinbaum and Greg Kohlberg have a presentation for the committee on this.
Thank you. I'll try and be quick on this. I think that most of the board members have heard about what's in the program from their operating committees, so let's just start. There are, both in this program and the 20-year needs, a focus on two priorities. One is rebuilding the system, and you've all heard the discussion with thousands and thousands of assets. The rebuilding is an investment that happens in perpetuity. The second is expanding the system. The 20-year needs, as you recollect, gave a broader vision of the expansion needs. This program funds completion of the current 2 mega projects. So where have we been since we first issued this program? You'll remember we submitted the program to everybody for review on August 10th. We put it up on the website, which is something new to have it up so early, both this and the capital and the 20-year needs. We've briefed board members, we've briefed PCAC and the Riders Committees, we've briefed legislative staff, transit advocacy groups, building Congress groups, and others. This early in the process, that's an extraordinary outreach effort. We have gotten Q's and A's, and we have shared with the board our answers to many of those, most of those. The intent is to put those up on the website so people can see the questions and the answers, and to regularly update them. So if there are any that have been missed or left out, I apologize now. Let us know. We'll provide the question and the answer to them. And we have already done some modifications to the program based on the input we've received from these briefings. You have a new book in front of you which reflects some of that modification. Let me just quickly, these are the major areas. There are lots of corrections throughout, but in the major areas, we've made clear the commitment to real-time customer information investments, particularly in buses and transits program. You'll now see the $50 million that is now allocated to buses in the 10 to 14 program. This is to bring the what people are calling the countdown clocks to buses. In addition, you'll see the write-up about bringing a PACIS to the remaining B division stations that currently don't have it at all, and that will have a connection to the RCC. It won't be driven by a smart background system, ATS, but it will allow us to put out information. I know the city's interested in us moving that forward, the whole PACIS and subways forward more rapidly, and that will be part of the ongoing discussions that we have. We have amended, people pointed out that the state of good repair discussion across the agencies is not consistent. We have made that discussion consistent now, so if you look at transit on pages 33, 34, or Long Island Railroad on page 60, Metro North on page 83, B&T on page 150, you'll see that the discussion is more consistent throughout. There were comments that Long Island Railroad seemed to be not as engaged in transit-oriented development as was Metro North. In fact, they are engaged in this. They're working with a transit-oriented development group that's here at headquarters. We have corrected or expanded that discussion on page 64 of Long Island's book. You can see that. We explain the progression of Long Island Railroad mainline corridor improvements in both the prior and future programs. That seemed to be missing as well, and that you can see on page 66. We have better identified the long-range planning projects, and you'll see that on page 123. And at a discussion that happened at Bridges and Tunnels, there was lack of clarity as to whether the study looking at video tolling would also allow, if the study's findings were that was the direction to go into, would allow the funding of that direction. And in fact, there's enough money related to toll plazas to allow funding of either the current barrier system or a video tolling system. So all of those things have been changed, and we're going to continue to listen and make modifications as appropriate. So let me just quickly highlight the program. As you see, we have talked about a $28 billion program. If you add B&T to the total that's CPRB related, you'll recollect that not all of our agencies are approved by the Capital Program Review Board in Albany. Bridges and Tunnels self-funds and is not subject to their approval. The rest of the program is transit. This chart shows the shares for transit, Long Island, Metro North, MTA Bus, also the interagency section. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. Since this is finance, we probably should spend some amount of time talking about how do we fund this program. And what you see here is projected funds and remaining gap. So we project having about $18 billion worth of funds with a gap of about $10 billion. I want to caution that the amount that we're projecting for federal funds and city capital funds both assume a substantial increase. The federal formula takes into account regular inflation of the numbers that we typically have, plus it increases the federal amount by 25%. This is based on our expectations from reauthorization. We did very well the last time with reauthorization and had a substantial increase, and we're expecting that again this time. City capital funds, we also have assumed a 25% increase in those funds. Federal security and MTA bus, federal and city match remain constant, stable. Bridges and tunnels, as you remember, their program was 2.5, and this fund's 2.5. They're self-funding. The next two, $6 billion in MTA bonds and $600 million. The $6 billion in MTA bonds reflects the fact that as part of the legislation that was passed recently in Albany, there were sufficient revenues to support the debt service on $6 billion worth of bonds. That's what that line is. The $600 million is from a variety of sources, asset sales, pay-as-you-go capital, and other internal sources. And the expectation was that that $600 would be available in the first 2 years, which is why you've been hearing discussions about having 2 years of funding and looking for the last 3 years of funding. The financial plan includes amounts for pay-as-you-go capital. The rest would come from the other sources, which we have not fully computed at this point. So that's the $18 billion in anticipated funding and a $10 billion purported gap. So I want to quickly go through what's in the agency's sections. You've heard this in your committees. I know just before this meeting, Transit went over its program. As you can see, this is pretty standard bread and butter transit investment. Significant investment in rolling stock, including for growth. Significant investment in buses, including for growth. It implements the end of Phase 1 bus rapid transit, which when we've been out and listening to advocacy groups and stakeholders, this is a critical investment for them. We institute the new station program. I think you all know about this. It will do renewals and components. Components that are at the end of their useful life will get addressed as opposed to the old rehab program. The program does, however, continue rehabs of those stations that were reprogrammed from the 0509 program. It implements smart card and real-time bus and subway information. It invests $1 billion more in signals than in the past program, and then continues more of that hidden infrastructure work that we talk about so often. For Long Island Railroad, there's a significant amount of their program that's invested in East Side Access readiness projects. They're also going to be building double track on the main line from Ronkonkoma to Central Islip. They're going to finish the Atlantic Avenue Viaduct repair project, the next phase of centralized train control in Jamaica, and then for them as well, the bread and butter infrastructure projects you're used to seeing. For Metro North, continuing, again, a state of good repair and normal replacement. They, too, have a significant rolling stock investment that they anticipate. Significant work will continue in stations. They will also be bringing real-time information to their east of Hudson stations and finishing the next phase of the Harmon Shop and Yard replacement project. In terms of interagency investments, there is the continuing capital security investments. In addition, there's a safety investment. Gary mentioned the loan program for positive train control. The agency's programs include investments to ready the agency. The two railroads programs include investments to ready their signals to have a positive train control overlay. This funds $400 million for what is expected to be the remainder of the cost. There's a study now out there that will identify whether this is the right amount or not. And in addition, the agencies are intending to go after federal grants to help support that project. MTA police investments are more of the kind that you've seen before, district offices. In addition, they're interested in doing a radio investment. They're currently in a survey phase now, finding out what's available. And this will be reviewed for a full scope before we go out with this. There's money in here to complete the implementation of the PeopleSoft platform for the Business Service Center and to support the rehabilitation of the building that the Business Service Center and other current leaseholds would go into. And there are planning studies which we'll talk about a little bit later, but for the Tappan Zee Bridge Rail Study, Queens Corridor and Staten Island corridors, and a regional bus study. Bridges and Tunnels program can largely be summarized in one word, decks. 70% of their program is to redo decks at 4 of their bridges. Those are very large and very expensive projects, and they take up the bulk of this program. In addition, the study is underway to evaluate video tolling at their facilities. As I mentioned earlier, as to the mega projects, the capital program completes the funding for East Side Access and Second Avenue, as recently told to the committee by Capital Construction Company. The 5.7 is the amount to complete that project, those projects. Yes, thank you. Phase 1 of Second Avenue. These are the studies that will be undertaken by planning, Tappan Zee Corridor evaluation, Queens Boulevard Corridor, and Staten Island, both North Shore and West Shore. The expectation is out of these studies, we will prioritize future expansion investments that you would then see in later capital programs. In addition, we have already taken stronger measures to control this capital program and will continue to do so. Before projects got into this program, the Office of Construction Oversight with the independent engineer took a review of budgets and made adjustments in some cases. We, as you know, for those of you who have been attending CPOC, we do risk assessments now of any of the major contracts within the large projects, and we have extended those to any large projects in the capital program. The IEC, the independent engineer, has been affirmatively tasked with monitoring risk and mitigation activities and reporting on the success of those. We intend early in October to implement what we're calling a capital program dashboard, which will show every project in the proposed 10 to 14 program, a little description of it, and we'll track its budget and schedule and scope over time, so you can look at any one project and know where it stands at any moment. And we intend to be implementing a mentoring program for small businesses. There's legislation currently pending in Albany that would provide the resources to allow us to do this effectively. So where are we? You have before you a staff summary where we are asking the board to move this to asking this committee to move this to the full board so that we can authorize the submission of this program to the Capital Program Review Board as required by October 1st. There will undoubtedly be significant ongoing discussions related to this program, both with the new Chief Executive Officer and Chairman, as well as this board, as well as legislators. That will continue over the next few months, hopefully building up to having a program early in 2010. Greg and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, are there any questions, please, before we move this?
Will the main line, the Long Island main line, third track be on the dashboard?
The readiness projects that are in this program will be on the dashboard. There is not a specific mainline project in the 10 to 14 program, but any project that's in specifically this program will be tracked on the dashboard, every one of them. All the blue, what we call the blue pages, and I think, are they actually, they're not blue yet. They used to be blue. The back pages that list all of the projects, every single one of those will be in. It will be a clickable dashboard. You can click the name of the project to find a description of it. Budget and schedule, all of those will be followed through.
So the modification on page 3 of your presentation is not exactly putting it in the program then?
What it explains is investments that Long Island Railroad is planning to do with funds that were in the 0509 program, and it talks about how the investments, those investments with investments proposed for East Side Access Readiness in this program will lead to the ability in future programs to begin a rollout of third track. Correct. there'll be investments that will be made from funds in 0509 that will facilitate greater capacity on the main line and will make the effort to then move into full third track simpler, facilitate the movement into the full third track.
Doreen?
Just a quick question, and Linda, I suspect you may know the answer to this, but maybe not. On opening day for East Side Access, how many Long Island Railroad trains will be brought into Grand Central Station with that third track?
The expectation, Long Island's expectation is that the service that had been expected with East Side Access, and do you remember how many, 24 trains I think it is, to Grand Central will be able to be met, that it's not a third track issue. It's an issue of the East Side Access readiness projects. It's the changes at Jamaica. It's the scoot service that is expected there. It's the second track that I talked about before from Central Islip. That those are what's required to allow the railroad to put through enough service to meet the East Side Access opening day needs.
Thank you.
Reverse.
Not really a question, just a quick comment. I just want to thank Linda and her staff for working over the last couple of months, well, prior to putting this out, but over the last couple of months on some of our concerns. As I thank the Transit Authority as well. I think there's some real good improvements in here, and I know that we'll continue having conversations about adding new improvements and innovation into the particular plan itself. I guess I wanted to point out two things and two concerns that as we continue having those discussions moving forward, in addition, on the chart we talked about the size of the plan, that the funding gap's like $9.9 billion. That assumes obviously that this is the appropriate size of the plan. I think that's something we should continue discussing. The legislature, as part of the package 2 months ago, funded, I guess, the first 2 years of the package, but there's no funding for 3 years. And so I think the MTA's needs, which I believe gets sent along with this document to CPRB, is the needs assessment.
We had presented CPRB members with both the 20-year needs as well as this when we first kicked this off.
So I think that's an important point, is that this represents just that same basket. And given that there is no funding for the final 3 years of the plan, I'm not sure what the size of the plan should be, and I think that's part of continued conversation, as well as the size and the share of the plan within. And we've talked about this before. A lot of the interagency programs and the share going to New York City Transit, recognizing there's a big portion of it that's mandated by the federal government that we can't get out of, is one that concerns me a little bit. Not that they shouldn't have it, but of course that everyone gets their fair share of the funds, that I know will be of continued discussion as we move forward. So more of a comment than a question, but thank you.
Andrew, I'm sorry. I really don't mean to prolong this agony, but but this is my first capital plan, so I'm a rube. It's just interesting to see a $10 billion funding gap. And do we typically have a way to say, all right, here are the things that we would have to pull out or change to actually have this balance? I'm just not used to seeing capital plans with this magnitude of a gap.
This is actually, if I recollect, Greg, you can confirm this. I think it's a little smaller than the gap that we had in 0509 before we submitted it. So it's not unusual. The conversation is just starting relative to this. It will be starting about what's in it, what's not in it, and how to fund it. And all of that will be unrolling over the next few months. You'll be part of it, as will others who are interested in this program.
I'm a rube. Thank you very much.
Susan? We're getting some action. Go ahead, Susan.
I'm sorry to prolong the agony as well, but I'd also like to point out that the money going to the operating agencies is overwhelmingly being spent to get us back to state of good repair. So this seems to me to provide a double edge. We recognize that by not providing for our capital plan, we get ourselves in a hole and we dig out of it, and yet we don't have enough money to fund some of the things which we know from our 20-year projection we should be funding. And nowhere is that more clear to me than in Metro North, where 90% of that operating agency's funding is going to state of good repair, not potential expansion where we know we're going to have huge growth in the future. So, very sad mess.
That's it. May we have a motion, please? And a vote, and a second, please? And a vote, please? Okay, goes to the board. Thank you. Gary?
All right, next we move to reports and information items. There are two. The first is MTA's financial statements for the 3 months ending June 2009. You each have a copy of those. They are in draft. They will be brought to the Audit Committee for approval this afternoon. If there are any significant changes, we expect no change. If there is any change, we will bring it back to the Finance Committee next month. No, that's information only. The second is an update on the Envision IT Strategic Information Technology Plan. That's on page 25 of your reports. And Wael Hebrew is here if there are any specific questions. Otherwise, we can move to the procurements.
Okay, if we move forward.
Procurements, MTA headquarters. There are a total of 5 procurements totaling $3,344,922.
He's still in the capital plan. Okay, may we have a motion, please? Second, please. And a vote, please. Next, Gary.
Okay. Next, we have Metro North procurements. There are 3, 2 non-competitive, 1 competitive. The grand total is $2,200,000.
I'll move it. Second? And a vote, please. Next.
And under Long Island Railroad, there is 1 non-competitive procurement for $409,000.
Motion, please.
Second.
Vote. Done.
No items for Long Island Bus. For bridges and tunnels, we have 1 procurement, and that is for a total of $363,906.11.
Motion, please. Second. A vote, please.
New York City Transit has a total of 4 procurements totaling $26,450,000. 3 are non-competitive, 1 is competitive.
Motion, please. And a second, please. I just had one question here, and Doreen, you can probably answer this. The $750,000, for the CBTC system, I assume that we're happy the way this Canarsie line's working now, because I was going to ask Stanley and, Connie to come up, but I'm sure you, the essence of time, you probably covered this in the committee, and I was just wondering how this went.
This is good Siemens. This is the part of Siemens that seems to be doing a very, very good job for us. So we didn't have discussion about it in the committee, but in my briefing with the committee, I was satisfied that this is moving along.
So you're happy with that?
I am happy with it.
Okay, a vote, please.
MTA Bus has 1 action item. It's an amendment to the 2000-2004 capital program, and that's on page 81 of your books.
Second, please. Vote, please. And now a motion, please, to adjourn the Finance Committee?
No, sir.
Sorry.
Capital Construction has 1 action item, and that is for East Side Access 48th Street entrance on page 83 of your books.
Okay, we need a motion, please. And a second, please. And a vote.
And lastly, someone indicated that I may have skipped over the procurements for Metro North. I don't think I did. We did do those.
No, Jim, okay. Okay, a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting. And a second, please. And a vote, please. Thank you, everybody. No, you did that. Jim,
I thought
Jim did.